Good afternoon. I call this regularly scheduled meeting of the Ways and Means Committee to order. I'm the chair of the committee. My name is Abdul Osami, and we are joined by Council Member Johnson, Fletcher, Palmisano, and Vice President Jenkins. And we have a quorum of the committee and are able to take up consideration of city business today. First, let's dispense with our consent agenda for today. On our consent agenda, we have 32 items for consideration. 28 on your Ways and Means agenda. 2 are receive and file, and there are 2 walk-on items. So let me start with consent agenda. Number 2 on our agenda is contracts for legal services panel. Number 3 is a legal settlement. Number 4 is also a legal settlement. Number 5 is a contract amendment for Technology Management Corporation for additional information technology and audiovisual consulting services for the new public service building. Number 6 is a grant from the Downtown Improvement District and amending contracts with Hennepin County Department of Community Corrections for probation officers services. Number 7 is a bid for the 2nd Precinct Air Handler Unit Replacement Project. Number 8 is amendment to Miniflex plan document. Number 9 is a contract amendment with Delta Dental of Minnesota for administrative services for the city of Minneapolis' dental benefit. Number 10 is a contract amendment with Northern Lights Minnesota for consulting services related to the Creative City Challenge. Number 11 is a grant from the Minnesota Department of Health for innovative state and local public health strategies. Number 12 is a proposed sale of 14 Royalston Avenue North to the Metropolitan Council. Number 13 is a 2018 Emergency Management Performance Grant. Number 14 is a 2018 Urban Area Security Initiative grant from the Department of Homeland Security. Number 15 is an agreement with the State of Minnesota Office of State Court Administration for court data services. Number 16 is a contract with Downtown Improvement District policing during holidazzle. Number 17 is a contract with Horseman Inc. for mounted patrol boarding services. Number 18 is a donation of travel and lodging expenses for the 2018 National Immigrant Integration Conference. Number 19 is the 8th Street South Hennepin Avenue to Chicago Avenue Street Reconstruction Project approval, assessment, and areaway abandonment. Number 20 is a contract amendment with Metropolitan Council Environmental Services for the Phase 9 Interceptor Improvement Project. Number 21 is a contract amendment with Schaefer Contracting Company, Inc. for 54th Street West Reconstruction Project. Number 22 is a contract amendment with Park Construction Company for 18th Avenue Northeast Reconstruction Project. Number 23 is a contract amendment with Engineering and Construction Innovations, Inc. for the 14th Avenue South Sanitary Sewer Replacement Project. Number 24 is a contract amendment with Bolton and Menk, Inc. for additional professional services for the 4th Street Reconstruction Project. Number 25 is a contract with the City of Bloomington for reimbursement of water work for the City of Minneapolis. Number 26 is an application for the 2018 Minnesota Safe Routes to School State Infrastructure Program. Number 27 is a bid for rental of motor grade for snow removal. Number 28 is a rental vehicle insurance policy. Number 29 is a site agreement with AmeriCorps to host Minnesota Opioid Response Corps member. And number 30 is a receive and file. So number 30 is a receive and file, staff purchasing and joint powers letter reports for September 2018. Number 31 is again receive and file, staff purchasing and joint powers letter report for 2018. And then we have 2 walk-on items, and I'll read them briefly, and all my colleagues should have the walk-on items as well. The first one is a contract agreement authorizing an amendment to contract with Variant for the addition of Sequus software application to replace 311's current reporting tool, including maintenance, support, and hosting of the software application and data. And The second walk-on item is a settlement authorizing settlement of workers' compensation matter for Corey Herman by payment in the amount of $150,000 to Mr. Herman and his attorneys, and authorizing the city attorney's office to execute any documents necessary to for this settlement. Okay, so is there any discussion on these items from my colleagues? Anything that they wanted to look over, discuss? And we've been joined by Councilmember Cunningham. Thank you for joining us. And Councilmember Johnson would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's not specific to any of these items. I just want to note for folks, I'm going to be standing most of the meeting because I have back problems I'm dealing with right now. So it's unusual to stand for most of the meeting. So I just wanted to note in case anybody's wondering what the heck's going on with that guy.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Councilmember Johnson, and I hope you get better soon. Any other discussions on these items? Okay, so I move these items for approval. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against, and those items have been approved. Thank you very much. Next, we have our public hearing, which is in item number 1, which is competitive bidding threshold ordinance. And I believe I have city staff. Let me read this item. One is a passage of ordinance amending Title II of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinance relating to the administration, increasing the amount of pre-approved form contracts for professional, technical, and service contracts, bidded contracts, and target market contracts from $100,000 to $175,000, consistent with the competitive bidding threshold in state law. Chapter number 1 is Chapter 17, Finance Department. Number 2 is Chapter 18, Purchasing. And number 3 is Chapter 18A, Target Market Program. And the second of these items are passage of ordinance amending Title 16, Chapter 423 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinance relating to planning and development, small and underutilized business enterprise program, increasing the threshold amount from $100,000 to $175,000, consistent with the competitive bidding threshold in state law. Number 3 is passage of resolution approving revision of the review requirements of the Permanent Review Committee prior to consideration by the City Council. Number 4 is passage of resolution adopting the use of a form contract for professional, technical, and service contracts that are anticipated to be less than or equal to $175,000. And number 5 is authorizing city procurement procedures to be updated to reflect the change in law. And I believe I have our CFO, Mr. Mark Ruff, and Pam Fernandez also here. So go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Mark Ruff, the Chief Financial Officer. As you highlighted, this is mainly a conformity with state law issue that relates to the ordinances that we have. But as with many things in Minneapolis, our purchasing policies are more sophisticated than state law, and so to help us unravel and reveal some of the sophistication necessary for this discussion, I'm going to turn it over to our Procurement Director, Pam Fernandez.
Welcome, Pam.
Good afternoon, Chair Warsami and council members. I'm Pam Fernandez. Thanks, Mark, for that introduction. I'm going to quickly go through a few slides here that is related, kind of explains quickly what those changes are. Our office is responsible for all the purchases of goods and services, including construction. And our municipal contracting law, which is our state statute, that tells us how we are buying, what rules are to be followed. That municipal contracting law changed recently in August, and they raised our thresholds from 100 to 175,000. So we are here today to request changes to our city ordinances to follow that threshold changes, and this will change our bidding threshold from currently 100,000 to 175,000. So how does this affect the city procurement? As you can see, I have marked up the slide to show you like where the changes are. We have two main categories of purchases: commodities construction, which follows the bidding process, and then the professional services, which follows our request for proposal process. And any purchases under 2,500 are directly placed by the departments. For contracts over 100,000, always have an open competitive process. And in 2018, as of October 31st, we have about $207 million in purchases. Contracts between 100 and 175,000. This actually shows the impact of this change. It's not a major change, but what is the big impact is that this is going to, these purchases are now going to be called the small purchases, and these can now go to the target market program businesses. So that is the big change we are expecting with this one. And as we indicated before, the main changes that are coming are, to change the contracting thresholds from 100 to 175, and then we are amending Chapter 18.170 to allow us to buy certain types of services through the joint powers contract, and this does not include professional or technical services. Eco-benefit provisions will be updated to 175,000, and target market program ordinance will also be raised to 175. SUBP goals determination will now start at 175,000. There were two resolutions that affected our contracting process as well. The standard form contract is sitting at 100,000. It'll now be raised to 175,000. And then the permanent review committee will review requests for proposals that are over 175,000 going forward. So with that, are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Fernandez? The changes? No?
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And so this is a public hearing. So does anyone from the public, so I'll open the public hearing. Does anyone from the public want to speak to this item? With the increase from 100,000 to 175,000? Anyone? Anyone? Any of my colleagues want to speak on this item? Well, seeing first, there's no discussion, I'll close the public hearing and, Cam is it? Yes. Council member Cam Gordon. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak, and I could have gone and spoken at the public hearing, I suppose, too. I haven't had an opportunity to talk to all of you, but I do have concerns about this issue. In fact, we just recently amended our ordinance for the small and underutilized business program, and we kept it at $100,000. I'm concerned about raising it to 175, and we may miss setting some goals where we very easily could set good goals. I appreciate the target market program. I think that it's done a wonderful job, but what it's done is made sure that contracts went to small businesses. And if you look at the last 2 years of records, 94% of those small businesses in 2017, actually was 94.85%, went to non-minority small businesses. We made a little progress in 2018, 90.69% went to small non-minority businesses. So if we really want to try to reach our minority businesses, I think we need to keep it down at 100,000 and keep some of those. And if it turns out it's unrealistic to set the goals, our Civil Rights Department has an opportunity to do that.
So, okay, thank you for those comments. Do you have an answer to that?
Mr. Chair, I think Velma Corbel, Director Velma Corbel is here and can speak to some of the SUBP issues that Councilmember Gordon raised, so I certainly would encourage if acceptable committee to hear from Velma.
Director Corbel, welcome.
Mr. Chair and committee members, good afternoon. My name is Velma Corbel. I'm the director in the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights. Thank you for allowing me to answer the question. Councilmember Gordon, for those who might not be familiar with the Small and Underutilized Business Program, it's actually a subcontracting program in the city of Minneapolis that ensures that businesses owned by women and businesses owned by minorities are included in the city's purchasing. And typically that subcontracting happens currently for every construction, technical services, or city-assisted contract. That subcontracting threshold kicks in at $100,000. But what we find with that is a contract for $100,000 is typically single scope. There's not a whole lot of opportunity for subcontracting. So as I look at this move from $100,000 to $175,000, I think this may actually help the small and underutilized business program, and I'll tell you why that is. If there is no opportunity for subcontracting at $100,000, $175,000 does give a little bit more room with which to include subcontracting. So, for example, a contractor is less likely to want to subcontract out a portion of a $100,000 contract. The margins on that are so small, it's usually a fairly single scope contract. $175,000, there's more of an opportunity, I believe, to subcontract a portion of that. A business might be likely to subcontract, for example, 10% of a $175,000 contract at $17,500, then they offer a $100,000 contract at $10,000. It's just, I'm saying it may or it could, not necessarily being 100% certain, but I don't think it will harm the small and underutilized business program to move this threshold to $175,000. You know, there are a lot of other ways that the city could increase its inclusion of women and minority businesses. The small and underutilized business program is only one tool that the city has available to it. There are lots of other things that need to be done. And Councilmember Gordon, you will remember this, that back in the spring, the city actually approved the disparity study recommendations that were part of that most recent disparity study. I think if the city were to implement those disparity study recommendations, that could certainly do as much, if not more, than the goals that are set on the small and underutilized business program contract. I also think, Councilmember Gordon and committee members, that every person in the city, including this council, needs to do everything in its power to leverage every opportunity we can to include women and minority contractors on city contracts. There are some ways that we can do that. The city has a race and equity department or division inside the coordinator's office that has some ways that could happen. Primarily, one of the ways I think we can do that is to move out of our comfort zone and stop using the same contractors that we use all the time. There are a greater universe of certified women and minority firms out there that can do business for the city of Minneapolis, and I think we need to move to looking more broadly at those firms. Sometimes we hear that there are not enough certified contractors with which to contract. Then we need to make sure that we are doing the outreach and identifying those firms that are ready, willing, and able and can be certified to participate on city contracts. There is a video on the city's television station that talks about the millions of dollars of city spend, and I think departments need to be a lot more intentional about how we are engaging and including women and minority firms on this. $175,000 threshold on SUBP is not going to make that much of a difference unless we are intentional about how we're including these firms on our city contracting. So I know that was more than probably the answer to that question, but I don't want to miss an opportunity to encourage people in this city to do everything that it can to make sure that women and minorities have an opportunity to participate on these public contracts. So,
Thank you, Director Corbett. We have a question or comment from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Warsame. And Director Corbett, I was wondering, is there an intentional effort to help increase and improve the capacity of the small and underutilized business providers?
Mr. Chair and Council Vice President, there are some opportunities in the city that are in place. There's some programs. There's a program out of Community Planning and Economic Development Department called Business Technical Assistance, where the city actually contracts with a little over a dozen providers where if the city actually contracts with this, they actually fund these contracts. that will build capacity in small women-owned and minority-owned firms. We also partner with some other organizations in the city like MEDA, the Metropolitan Economic Development Association, that also is building capacity in small minority-owned firms in the city. The thing that I think also the city can help on is that the Civil Rights Department actually certifies women and minority-owned firms to be able to participate in our purchasing and contracting programs. And I know that departments are spending money with firms. What we'd like to see is those departments encourage those firms to become certified to be able to participate on city contracting. So there are ways to certainly increase capacity in those businesses, but also increase the numbers of those firms that can do business with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Councilmember Gordon.
Well, it certainly wasn't my intention to get in any kind of debate with staff about this, so I wasn't expecting to have a necessarily
I love a good debate.
rebuttal to my offer, but I'll just say $100,000 is a lot of money, and even if only 10% of that was going to be subcontracted out, let's say you needed a lawyer to help you do some work for the city and you got a contract, I think then we can go back and say, well, let's set a goal for 10%, and you can hire a firm that's owned or operated by a person of color. I think people will look at $100,000 and they'll think that is a lot. And so we could require it to at least run through the program, and those that made sense, they could have to meet some goals that we could set with them. I think a lot of people will see that as a significant amount of money. I think what we're doing is we're responding to a Republican legislature that decided they wanted to raise the minimum there, and it's just easier to follow what the state's doing because then it's less paperwork and it's less of a bother and it's less trouble. And I agree. Most of the contracts with subcontracts are probably going to be higher. Of course, if it's a $3 million contract, you've got a lot of opportunities to have subcontracts. So maybe we really won't necessarily be catching a lot of people. But believe me, that 10% who would have gone that year without that $10,000, because without that contract, will get it. And all of a sudden they'll think, well, maybe competing in this area and trying to do business with the city and with public is good. I'm going to participate in it. I just... maybe there's a chance that we can carve out some kind of amendment to this as it goes forward so the SUPB could be kept out of it. Or maybe we can agree to just keep it at $100,000 a little longer and see how we can build up our target market program to really work. But the target market program, remember, is race neutral, so it's not even going to create preferences in any way, the same as we can with our small and underutilized business program that we did a whole disparity study around to say it's justified, it's legal, we need to do this for the region. And so I don't know why we're backtracking now. And I don't need to get in a back and forth with staff. I just wanted the opportunity to express my opinion here with policymakers.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. We have Councilmember Cunningham.
Through the chair, I just want to say to Councilmember Gordon, I do think it's necessary for city staff to be able to clarify because the example you gave actually is not the SUBP program. And I think it's necessary to be able to have clarification. I don't think it has to be a debate, but like the example that you gave actually isn't applicable. So can you clarify that?
Mr. Chair, through the chair to Councilmember Cunningham and Councilmember Gordon, let me just give you an example I think that will make the point a little bit clearer. On the Ways and Means agenda this morning, there is a request from the City Attorney's Office to create this menu or create this opportunity to go out and contract with legal services firms to be able to provide the services that they can on behalf of the City Attorney's Office to the City of Minneapolis. If this were the question, I think, is there's probably going to be several firms on that list that have the potential to earn more than $100,000 each over the life of those agreements. And so rather than having a firm subcontracting for $10,000 of one of those opportunities, I believe the better approach is to make sure that there are women-owned or minority-owned firms on that list who can get the $100,000 contract or the $175,000 contract. I think in terms of growing the business, in terms of building capacity in that small business, and in terms of providing a greater share of the city spend to women and minority firms, I think that's what we want to do. The small and underutilized business program has been very successful in subcontracting with women and minority firms, but it only does so at those 10, 15, 20% of the prime contracts that come through that program. And it doesn't really build the capacity in those small businesses to function as prime contractors, because it is always going to be a subcontracting program. I think where we get hung up with the target market program and its difference between that and the SUBP is the target market program is a race and gender neutral program, but it also is set up to build capacity in small firms to be able to become prime contractors, so they're not always being used as subcontracts. And what we need to do as a city is be more intentional about reaching out to women-owned and minority-owned firms, because even with a race-neutral program, we have got to let women and minority-owned firms know when those opportunities are available. And we don't do a good enough job with that.
Thank you for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure, because from my understanding of the two various programs, that would look different. So I hear you in
Councilmember Gordon.
Of course, we have to do
I actually
everything-
wasn't finished talking.
Councilmember Cunningham.
It was just distracting when you did that. But I do think that it's necessary for us to think about the larger landscape. Going from 100,000 to 175,000 opens up more opportunities, and I think that this is. I don't really see any data or support that says that growing it is going to be harmful, but there is logic and evidence behind that it could create more opportunities. So I think this is a part of a larger conversation about supplier diversity, because that is a system that we currently don't have all the connections in place to be able to address the massive disparities that we see. And I mean, we all talk about how shameful they are, and we know that it needs to get there. So I am supporting this change, but wanted to make sure that we were clarified. It was clear, though, about like the various differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I could come up with another illustrative example. I don't think that I was trying to say anything that was outside the SUBP program. I think the firm I was talking about could have been building a street or demoing a building. They could have been getting some money from CPED. So I wasn't trying to throw you off with that at all. I actually think there might even be a way of having something that comes in between. Whereas if you go through the SUBP program and we also allow the target market to go up to 175, I have no objection to do that. If something doesn't justify setting goals for it through the SUPB, both programs could apply. So I wasn't trying to imply that.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Thank you, Director Corbell, for your wonderful explanation. Is there any further discussion on this item? Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Rasami. I'll just say that when I was first approached about this, I had the initial reaction that Councilmember Gordon did. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but one of the things that I appreciated when staff spoke to me about this, and I wonder if they have these numbers available, is that they did look at how many would have been affected had this change been made last year. They sort of looked backwards at the data, and this was a very data-informed decision that showed that it would not have been impactful in the ways that we were afraid of. And, you know, there's sort of two ways that we can exclude people from doing business with the city, right? One is by old practices where we don't think intentionally about how to incorporate historically marginalized business owners into a city business, but the other is to make it overly burdensome in a way that you have to be so specialized in working with the city in order to manage the administrative cost of that, that small firms just can't do it. And so streamlining things, if it's not going to have a negative impact on the programs that we're trying to do to encourage more equity, is the right thing to do. So if you have that data available, I remember that we talked about it because I asked this question when we spoke earlier. I'd appreciate it.
Pam?
So, Councilmember
Yes, ma'am.
Barsami, Councilmember Fletcher, I would like to clarify that question. You're looking for the numbers that are between 100 and 175,000?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So in 2017, we have 4 million contracts or purchasing opportunities between 100 and 175,000. And in 2018, as of October, we have 2.6 million. So those are the opportunities that we are hoping to move on to target market program businesses.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no further discussion, I move approval of this item. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That item has been approved. Thank you very much to all the city staff for their hard work on this. Really appreciate it. And now we're going to move to our discussion agenda. We have 3 items for consideration today. Let's start with item 32. Item 32 is North Loop Paving Street Reconstruction Project approval, assessment, and areaway abandonment. And I have Councilmember Fletcher to talk on this item. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair Warsame. So we also considered this in Transportation and Public Works this week and moved it forward without recommendation because of an issue raised by a constituent who's impacted by this. For simplicity's sake, so that we don't provide contradictory recommendations coming out of the 2 committees, I'm going to ask that we move this forward without recommendation as well to the full council. I will be moving approval, or you will. We've got to work out the details of that, but we'll move approval on this when it gets to full council on Friday.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher has made a motion to approve item number 32 without recommendation. Any discussions on this item? Seeing none, all those in approval say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That item has been approved. Thank you very much. And now we move to our second discussion item, which is item number 33, which is 2019 financial policy updates.
Chair Warsame,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If we could
Item number 30.
back up to the previous item.
Yes.
So that we're clear, the item is going forward without recommendation. Is that correct?
Yeah, the motion was the item is going without recommendation.
Thank
and
you.
it was approved. Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Item number 33, 2019 financial policy update. And we have Micah, our budget director. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So each year we update the city's financial policies through the budget process. And so highlighting for you about 10 different recommendations that staff has this year for changes to our financial policies. So the first change is related to just a definition around proprietary funds and discretionary budget. This will help to clarify the definition of our current service level, particularly for our internal service and enterprise funds moving forward. Happy to answer any questions you may have, but given the other topics on our agenda, I do intend to go through this pretty quickly.
Go ahead.
Next, we are creating a fleet self-insurance pool. So the story behind this is that vehicles used to be built to be replaceable. You get in a fender bender, you replace your fender. Now the way that vehicles are built, they collapse on impact, and so we have a lot more totaled vehicles in the city. A lot is relative. We're seeing about 3 or 4 per year. But those vehicles do come at an expense, and so in order to help control for the fluctuation in costs for departments, we're just recommending creating a self-insurance pool in the self-insurance fund. Next, we're just recommending language to provide for an information technology or IT governance process. So for a number of years, we had used a capital asset request system, what was known as CARS, in order to help prioritize IT investments. That process is no longer used by the city, and so the intent behind this IT governance is to help not only the IT department prioritize its work, but also to help council and mayor as they're prioritizing funding and investments in IT. The next recommendation is just to clarify when we're talking about the self-insurance fund in our financial policies that we're not talking about the medical self-insurance that the city moved to a few years ago to great financial effect for the city, but that more specifically we're speaking to the workers' compensation and tort liability with respect to the various actuarially based estimates. The next item is to grant the finance officer the authority to set policy around alternative financing. So for the Muslim members of our community, they're not able to pay interest. And so this gives the finance officer the authority to structure the payments so that interest is no longer considered. The cost will still be recovered. It's an alternate structure to the financing. The next recommendation is to grant the finance officer authority to set policies around food purchases and the use of gift cards in various programs with the city. There's a public purpose doctrine that any dollar that the city spends needs to go for a direct public purpose broadly, and so we want to make sure that all of the expenditures that are being made from the city are indeed following this. In our financial policies, we have various fund balance requirements for different funds. Our central stores and engineering materials and testing funds in particular really don't need to hold a large cash balance, and so this change helps to clarify that when we're looking at at setting that cash balance, we're comparing against the true operating expenses of the fund as opposed to looking at any capital expenses within the fund. A few years ago, we updated our financial policies to require a CPED development program and project status report. Staff is recommending that rather than requiring this report each year, we leave it up to council discretion as to whether or not staff were to engage in this report, and it would be up to either the Ways and Means Committee or Economic Development and Regulatory Services to request that report. And that is our recommended changes. I would suggest that the best place to take these up is to amend these to our financial, into our budget tomorrow night.
Okay. Thank you very much to our budget director. Any questions or discussion on this item? Seeing none, I move to receive and file this item. All those in approval say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That item has been approved. Thank you very much. And before we move to the next item, I would like to recognize that we have a sacred drum here, and we have members of the community as well. So thank you and welcome. And the next item on discussion, item number 34, is the Hiawatha Maintenance Facility Campus Expansion. And we have to do the presentation, our CFO, Mr. Mark Ruff. Go ahead, Mark. We also have a number of other folks here as well, staff. Public Works are here. Our Director of CPED is here. So we have a full staff to give this discussion item.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm Mark Ruff. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today on this item. I've been at the city a little less than 3 years, and there has not been a week that has gone by where we have not talked about this project. As you alluded to, at the highest levels of staff review, we've been involved. I have been very grateful for Councilmember Cano in inviting us in conversations with community. For me as the middle-aged white guy in many of these conversations, it's been a great education for me to understand community's perspective on this project. All of us have had occasions where we feel like local governments are imposing upon us, and I think for us in finance and property services to be able to enter into conversation has been very valuable over these last several months. I'm going to go back and just spend some time on some history, because oftentimes in these longer conversations we make assumptions about where people are at in the knowledge of either the language or the project. And part of this history goes back to the northern part of this site, which originally, and Lisa Cerny highlighted this in TPW last week, that this site at one time, or has been in city ownership for over 100 years. On the northern part, this is 9 acres. You will see the building in kind of the upper left, which pieces of which are still remaining and were incorporated, into phase 1. But this site actually used to be utilized for an asphalt and concrete, essentially manufacturing facility to take care of our streets. You can see in the bottom left-hand side are buildings that still remain as well. Those are part of Finance and Property Services central stores. But this particular site was redeveloped. And when we refer to phase 1, it's the 9 acres on the top part, as this particular diagram does face north. At the top of the page is north. And so you can see that that older facility was incorporated into a public works facility, which incorporates a variety of functions. Those functions that operate out of there today are street maintenance, they're bridge maintenance, they are special service districts. There's a fair amount of surface water and sewer employees. We have well over 300 people that are working in that facility, and there are a fair number of vehicles on this site as well. The southern part of this site, 7.5 acres, commonly known as the Roof Depot property, but even before that was used as a warehouse for Sears, related to some of the retail facilities. That generically is referred to as phase 2 within our discussions. Okay. This is a picture of that phase 1 as you're on the north end of the site facing south on 26. This is what the building looks like. On the right, the historic building, and on the left, the newer function that holds the employees that I described earlier. That was a LEED Platinum, meaning that LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which is the highest level. There is, in addition to reuse of buildings, geothermal that is used on this site. I know that in discussions with community that sometimes history is not helpful in this, in the sense of, at least from the city's perspective, of how has the 7.5 acres phase 2 site been viewed by the city. But there have been a number of public actions that have been taken over time. This describes some of those public actions, and I would say more than anything else, what some of this history relates to is, over time, a move to consolidation of public works facilities. Consolidation brings efficiency. Consolidation minimizes the overall city's use of land, which is an important part of our longer-term comprehensive planning. And that history goes back over 25 years. Most recently, 2015, was a discussion among the City Council about the acquisition of this property and what should be put onto this property, and then in 2016 was actually the authorization for the acquisition of the property. In particular, because it was before my time, I spent a fair number of hours reviewing the minutes and actually going back and watching those meetings to make sure I understood the subtleties of what was being discussed. But at that time, there was a move to have Public Works expanded on this phase 2, but there was also an assumption that there might be some additional land available, and there were a variety of non-public uses that were described, everything from property and evidence for police warehousing to elections. And over time, those have been eliminated as options because of the increasing use and need for the space by Public Works. But there has been an evolution in discussion even at the council level, so I don't mean to say that has been a monolithic or singular kind of approach from the city without discussion or open-mindedness to other options. The primary driver behind phase 2 is the relocation of what's commonly known as the water yard. This facility in northeast Minneapolis at 5th and Hennepin is more than 100 years old. Right now it's 2.5 acres. It's undersized. It is not a healthy place to work. And we do anticipate that this building will either be primarily demolished or substantially rehabbed, but there will be a fire station, which is also in poor condition in that area, that will be relocated, which will be improving response times in that part of the city. Along with water distribution, and what I mean by water distribution is these are the folks in the water yard who maintain all of the pipes, the associated equipment that comes along with water distribution of the 55 million gallons. There's also a relocation of a team that deals with water meters, and we have over 100,000 water meters within the city. If you can, folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those folks are located right now out of the water campus in Fridley. In particular, a significant part of this team is emergency responses across the city. Currently, as I mentioned, and what will be expanded within Phase 2 is the surface water and sewer consolidation. And so, again, an important function, not only related to sanitary sewer, meaning what goes through the pipes, but clearly as climate change impacts rain events within the city, the surface water team has been challenged and will continue to be challenged to keep not only people safe, but property as dry as possible, knowing that parts of Minneapolis are certainly prone to flooding with these major rain events. On top of it, we have, and is what is being seen up in 27th and University, another site for the city where this consolidation is currently under construction, opportunities for trying out new technologies for stormwater treatment, and as this being the home of the Phase 2 of the stormwater folks within our city, we see that Phase 2 is an opportunity to provide even more leadership across not just the public sector but the private sector on how we deal with stormwater and rain events within the community. So I think that's been the primary driver. I think that oftentimes we've been just viewing this Phase 2 as simply a relocation of one building to and from Northeast Minneapolis down to 28th and Hiawatha, and that is not the case. The benefits of Phase 2 that we see to not only improve services for residents and users of the water, but also to improve the synergy that goes on among these different divisions within Public Works, and that includes the stormwater and the bridge and the street maintenance, so that when there is an emergency, we have people all in one place. When there is coordination necessary for equipment, we know where all that equipment is and can mobilize quickly, that there's savings on things as simple in how locker rooms work, that we have a place where vehicles can be turned over quickly, both in the maintenance bay and the wash bays, and that is a healthy place for our several hundred folks within property or within Public Works to work. And this is, I think, at a basic level, something that has emerged more and more. As I said, this has been an evolution, I think, for not just me, but for the staff working on this, of the importance of this job center. And we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. So, about, as I mentioned, this has been going on for 3 years with earnest within the city, much longer in planning. And I think about a year ago, we heard from elected officials that staff should take a step back and reevaluate how much space was really necessary for municipal operations. And with the understanding that this is Public Works operations, we're not talking about anything else, but how much could we reduce our footprint overall in order to free up other land, and what are some of the trade-offs that come along with that? Okay. So I'm going to go through these particular options. I have some larger boards because I know these smaller these smaller things on the screen are hard to read, and so hopefully, Michael, you can pick up in terms of on the camera this board, and I apologize for the people behind me that have to see through that. But I'm going to try to use some of this to explain the different components of this particular facility. Okay? So when I talk about Phase 1 and Phase 2, these are not mutually exclusive. In other words, Phase 1, the north part, is already completed. In fact, there's a great amount of construction that will be happening on the northern part of the site. And Michael, if you want to pan out just a little bit, I can take a walk through. So if we look at the area in the blue, these are actually buildings that will be constructed. We have approximately 130,000 square feet of new buildings that are proposed on this site. More than 90% of that 130,000 square feet are actually tempered, meaning they are temperature controlled. All right? So the blue are buildings. The darker gray in this area is a multi-level parking deck. I think there's no two ways about it. There are a substantial number of vehicles that already exist on the site, and those number of vehicles will increase. The yellow are what's called yard. I've used, for any of us who may visit a hardware store or a larger Menards, Home Depot type of place, you will have places that are storage, outdoor storage, that are uncovered, and that's the areas that are just commonly referred to as a yard. The green space is actual buffer space. The light blue would be snow storage and stormwater. So we see light blue at the very top of the chart. We also see light blue in this area that accounts for the need for temporary drainage. And then the white are the circulation patterns. And I think over time, one of the most important discussions, and since that year where we were challenged by elected officials to step back, see what we can do for the footprint, we've spent literally hundreds of hours with the architects to review what is the best layout for safety and flow through this site. And ultimately, what happened with this white was a circulation pattern which allows vehicles to enter into both the water distribution and the stormwater portion of the enclosed building here on the bottom of the site. And that allows for access that exists today out to 27th and Longfellow eventually, that exists away out to 26th, and that also would be a new entrance on and off of 28th here, and I'll talk about traffic impacts in a minute. The lighter gray are surface parking. So these are areas that we would have vehicles which are closer to some of those buildings and more temporarily located. And as I mentioned, the existing central stores would remain as well. In the bottom of this particular site is the training facility, which we will talk about a little later in this presentation, but the accessibility of the training center is one of the reasons we are recommending as staff, as this option is the one for the City Council to adopt. So before I move off of into other options, I want to make sure that the site itself is clear. In addition to the existing building, we will be adding on in blue for maintenance bays and wash bays on the existing facility. So there's an extension not only of the new construction for in this area and the ramp, but also new construction that will occur on this site.
Are you finished with the presentation?
I think if there's a particular question on the actual buildings and the square footages and the layout, this would be an appropriate time for that.
I think Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question on the, I had emailed you and some of the other staff members about the design, because the handouts don't have like a square footage marker to each square or rectangle and so forth. So I'm just curious, in option A, what is the size of the training facility in blue? And my other question was, I noticed that the parking ramp in all options except option A says that it's a 4.5 level parking ramp. So I just wanted to get clarity on that, because I thought the 4.5 level parking ramp kicked in if there was 1.5 acres allotted for private redevelopment, but in the drawings, the 4.5 parking ramp levels seems pretty consistent throughout options B, C, and D, except for, I think, option A, which I think option A just says 4 levels. So just wanted to get some specifics on some of these numbers.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, we are at the stage of design where we have not exactly placed buildings on this site. You know, these are still overall illustrative pictures. So to answer your question directly, the training facility on the bottom could be anywhere from 9,000 to 14,000 square foot footprint, and then it's a question of how many floors would be on. So, you know, whether there is exactly this number of parking spaces right north of the training facility, or whether the facility grows a little bit and that parking gets moved, that's the evolution of the design process that we are currently undertaking. This is at what we would call a program stage, which is, do we have big enough buildings to meet the needs of the different divisions, and are we making sure, and this is where Lisa Cerny spent a great deal of time on her own, do we have the underparked or overparked? Do we have the shift changes? Do we have all of the things that go into sizing a facility that we're taking into account? And I would say, based on this year's worth of work, we are confident we're within the 90 to 95%, but things will change. Even if you all said, great, go ahead, move on from here, there will be changes in this site, as they do with any particular design. The other changes in terms of the subsequent options, I'll hopefully answer those questions as we move through those other options. Yes.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Rosami and Director Ruff. I'm curious, the yellow rectangles or shapes, as it were, that are designated as yard storage, they seem to sort of be dispersed all throughout the site plan. Is there a reason why they can't be consolidated, or?
Sure. Mr. Chair, Council Vice President, maybe this next slide will help illustrate that. Your timing is good in terms of describing this. There are various components of what's necessary to maintain our infrastructure, right? And this picture is, I think, a great one of illustrating what some of those are, which is we have manhole covers in the upper left. We have water hydrants, fire hydrants on the bottom left. We have larger pipes associated with sanitary sewer on the bottom right, and then you can see in the upper right not only the manhole covers but also the vaults, the area that contain, you know, under the street that contain that. That material can only be stacked so high, and I think certainly Ms. Cerny can get up and talk about the more specifics about why we spread these out, but the short answer would be it's for efficiency's sake, right? We don't want to have all of this in one place because it would be an enormous area to be kind of moving around, and because we need to have space where smaller vehicles can fit in within some of the yard space. And so this illustration is the best I can give you to try to answer your question. Okay. Moving on, if I can, Mr. Chair, on the presentation, I think certainly sensitivity to the fact that we will have some of this yard storage, but Public Works, and this is a shot from the 27th and University buffering. Clearly an important part of the green space that would be involved here would be the buffering of some of that yard space, both with buildings and with landscaping that would be involved with those project elements. I think another important project element is that every one of the roofs of these buildings will be solar ready, and it is not only our intention, but we are moving forward as Property Services on putting solar on as many of not only our new buildings but our existing buildings as possible, and that's in conformance with the direction you as a council has given us to move to 100% renewable by 2022. That will be a choice for Ways and Means and the whole City Council as to how much of this is solar for the city's own electricity use versus how much can be utilized as a community solar garden for primarily neighbors. So we can then be a 20% user of that and potentially guarantee another 20% for those associated with low and moderate income. But as we have a very sophisticated city staff who are able to undertake either of those options, and this would be a part of the discussion on this whole facility. The other project elements that I alluded to earlier would just be stormwater treatment, and these are highlights of opportunities that either exist or could exist on this site for both a landscaping buffer as well as research in this area. Traffic impacts, as I mentioned, there are 3 outlets on various parts of this site. On the 26th Street side, the north side of this site, there is already traffic that exists. We would be lessening that traffic with the opening of the 28th Street option. So this blue is background, meaning that's the traffic that just goes by this building and does not stop. And then the green is the traffic, and these are trips, so it's coming in and leaving the site. And oftentimes for functions here, we will have 4 trips for every person as they come into the site for work, as they then leave to go out and work in the community, and then as they come back in and exit, sometimes not as many as those 4 per person. 27th has a low, and that's been intentional. This is again Longfellow and 27th, and this would be lessened as well. A low traffic volume within this particular site. On 28th, we would be increasing trips. Specifically, those are just over 800 trips per day. I can say that.
Mr. Ruff, if I can interrupt.
Sorry, I didn't mean for him to interrupt. I apologize. I was just curious if you could actually explain where these numbers come from and how you all projected it. If you could clarify where these numbers are coming from, that would be appreciated.
The traffic numbers. Yeah.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, we employed a professional traffic engineer who looks at how many people are working on the site, what their functions are. They interview the folks who are in management of that to try to get a sense, as I mentioned, how many people just come there and stay, how many people actually leave. There is peaking in this that they also look at, so it's not just a total trips, but it's at what times of day, and we have a full analysis if anybody on the council is interested to review that. But it is as close to a science as we can get, and utilize, certainly every private developer who comes to the city is also required to put forth this same kind of level of discernment. Yeah. So what I was going to mention, Mr. Chair, was just that I know the Greenway is a particular concern given the proximity. There is, under those traffic engineer numbers, as we know, 28th is a two-way street for much of this stretch. There's 275 cars coming in from the east that would be crossing the Greenway, and then 275 also leaving the site on a regular basis. One of the benefits of having Public Works as a essentially occupant of this site is we as a city can control how that traffic is managed, and we can put upon ourselves above and beyond what is required of any other development to make sure that there is the safest passing for those pedestrians and bicyclists who use that right of way. The other project element, I think, an important part of this in terms of number of vehicles, and certainly I know that Public Works leadership, as well as many council members, Councilmember Johnson in particular, have advocated strongly for greening of the fleet, and we see this as a real opportunity in all of our facilities, and especially this one will come with infrastructure that would allow us for electric vehicles as soon as that technology becomes at the affordable level. I know part of the discussion in the meetings I've been to, some pushback for us as city staff to say, hey, we'd like to hear an acknowledgement of what the neighborhood's proposal is. You're showing us the charts of what the city is proposing, but let's have a discussion about what the neighborhood is proposing, and certainly have had several discussions with Dean DeVolis from DGR, certainly individuals who are interested in occupying this building over the last couple of years. But just a quick review, I know many of you have had briefings from EP&I, the group who is proposing to put aquaponics, both what is called low-tech and high-tech. The original proposal from the community is for 3 acres with a small retail component. This drawing, I believe, shows 28 housing units over the top of some of that industrial use. There's $300,000 of more than $300,000 of state money secured, and at least the discussions we have would be requesting free land from the city. The low-tech would be related to preserving a part of the property that is the current building that's on the right side of this drawing. What I think is an effort to produce as low rents as possible for these businesses. And then the high-tech under the newer construction on the far left side of this. So an acknowledgement of that proposal and the discussions that we've had, because I would say that many of us in the departments have worked toward what we would see as a compromise, a place where both the city and the neighborhood proposal could exist. I will talk about that at the end of the project. I think the other things that I wanted to highlight was a reaction and efforts that we have brought forward to the neighborhood as well as now to this body is how close could we get to that 3 acres as that being an ideal towards this situation. And so we've come up with 3 other alternatives in addition to option A, which are before the committee at this time. And I won't use these boards unless there is a specific question that someone wants me to highlight. But I will walk through the advantages and disadvantages of each of those. So option B is to, in the bottom left, to have what is in the orange, to have non-municipal use. And so how do we accomplish that? We accomplish that by primarily moving the training facility to the northeast corner, the upper right hand of this picture. Okay, so it has become stacked with the other facilities that are proposed for this site. It would, as we move facilities up in that area, it reduces parking that is available on the southern part, which would, as to Councilmember Cano's point, be more than 4 levels of parking. We use 4.5 in all of these drawings because we can't tell you whether it's 4 1/4, 4 1/3, 4 3/4. This is not at a place where we can get down to that level of granularity, other than we know that as we add buildings on the top of this site, it's going to squeeze that parking ramp, not only in need for more spaces, but as we add more buildings on the north, it's going to shorten the length of that parking ramp, which just then means you have to go up higher. Okay? And the architects offered, but we declined to give in some of the cost to model that out. And so we don't have more granularity than just an acknowledgement that it'll be something more than 4 levels. The training space then being in the upper right-hand corner, it's less accessible. Part of the advantage of being in the area that we had described before under option A was, you can see the red on the bottom left when the training center in the bottom left, you had the ability to potentially have an outlet out to Longfellow or some kind of secured space, even if there's not an outlet out to Longfellow that would give more after hours access. It's more difficult when you move that up, and as I said, it's just more of a cramped space up in the northeast corner, but it is possible, and that's what you asked us to look at, was what's the realm of possible. The difficulties would be a higher expense, both by stacking the buildings, which is about $500,000 expense, and then some additional costs of parking, which we're estimating at $1 million. That's probably like a 70 to 80% accuracy number. Okay, if we can sell that land, and we would assume that per city policies, we would go through a procurement process, an RFP. If there's an offset for the land sale, then that would help reduce that cost. Right, so that's about 1 acre in that orange space. The most we could get in terms of overall size was about 1.5 to 1.6 acres. Again, how do we do that? We take away yard space. To Council Vice President's question, we would just either have to carry less inventory on the site and have smaller yard space. It's down by about 10,000, 11,000 square feet. Or we would have to enter into more expensive kind of racking or just be more creative about what kind of machinery we would need. That's a safety issue that we always have to be cognizant of, but we would try to find a way to have less yard space. As we increase the area of the orange, then again, puts more pressure, because what's the first thing that would go in trying to create more space would be probably parking, which would put more pressure onto probably closer to a full level on the parking deck, which is about a $3 million cost. We also would have more operating cost if we had less inventory. And again, uncertain about what the land sale offset would be. Option D is the same thing, just the orange being in a different place. So instead of all on the bottom left corner, it would be across the southern part of the site. But again, with that 28th access, that's important if we think about building this facility over the next 100 years. Other than that, I think the trade-offs and advantages and disadvantages are the same between option C and option D. So the analysis that we've come to, and this has been, as I said, a long process, the analysis that our staff recommendation remains option A. And part of that is because part of that is a recognition that that what we've heard from the neighborhood, the EP&I folks, is that they could move down to 2 acres of utilizing space. But there are 2 components, as I have, and David Frank's been in some of these discussions with me. as well with Dean DeVolis and with others in the community, is that keeping the existing building is an important part of what the EPNI proposal. And we cannot see a version of this public works facility to meet the needs over the next century that retains a part of that building, specifically as it relates to the access to 28th as well. Okay? So the 2-acre proposal that was brought forward did not include any parking for the EPNI, and so there would need to be some space allocated, and as we said, we're short on parking already. So I don't think this is a matter of compromise. I think it's a matter of, are we trying to accomplish two different sets of goals on the same site, which has created this zero-sum game, which has caused a great deal of the anxiety that exists within this project. And so I think that offset with the other alternative, which is over the last several months, has been this training facility that would be seen as a way to help address some of the needs of the community, maybe not within the particular vision of what EPNI has brought forward, but in the larger set of a key community asset. And Ms. Cerny referred to this in TPW last week. I'll just quickly highlight some of the factors that are driving this. One is increased number of retirements over the next decade for public works. We see fully almost a third of their workforce that will be eligible for retirement over the next 10 years. This recruitment and training center would not just be for city staff, but we've had early discussions and several discussions with labor organizations, with the park board, who can see the value of having hands-on training, which we currently send our staff, if not more than almost 2 hours away to facilities that can handle this kind of training. The second area is recruitment. That, as we've heard from the trades, is that when you go to the state fair, they have a semi-truck that you can go in and try out equipment. And this facility being located where it would be would give that opportunity for potential city employees to come in and say, here's the kind of work that I can be doing. So not only in drawing, not only training in the sense of safety, but also in another dimension of making the city a great place to work and demonstrating that early in the process. So the cooperation and the utilization of that kind of facility has emerged as one factor for the City Council to consider as we look at these different options of the facility. Specifically on this training center, we would have, if it were located in the bottom left-hand side of the site, it would be 2 levels. There would be a component of technology training. There would be classrooms and simulation, which include computer training then. And then the first floor would be shop, and then also actually a big sand pit, so a place where people who have to go into the ground and have a vault that protects them from collapsing walls could practice that in a safe environment before they have to go out into the elements or into an emergency situation. That we see as one of the major components. This is, frankly, I think has generated excitement within the city as an opportunity. This is a rendering, if that facility were to be in the southwest corner of the site, what it would look like, again, with the landscaping buffers that we have talked about. So finally, that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you for your indulgence. I would say that as staff, this project has been a struggle because we want it to work. We want it to work not just for the Public Works Department, we want it to work for the neighborhood. We appreciate Councilmember Cano's efforts to increase the conversation that has happened. Again, as many of us were able to attend the movie last night put on by the Bloomberg Philanthropies and National Geographic that talked about climate change. And I was inspired by that movie. I know a number of you were there as well. I was inspired by it for 2 reasons. One is it highlighted this issue that I described earlier about stormwater impacts of climate change, and that, there was a story about Miami and losing their source of water. Thankfully, we don't have that in the Midwest, but we clearly have issues of stormwater and what we're going to be doing for our property over a longer period of time, which just tells me that the importance of maintaining a facility that's going to be able to address those challenges over the next 100 years as we see that dramatic change is going to be important. The second, though, that was highlighted in there were the stories of job training that exists within Green Jobs for out of a community college situation in Iowa and out of a East LA taking folks who are coming out of incarceration and training them. And what that tells me is that the city is on the right path on looking at this as an opportunity to realize some of that vision in terms of combining the recruitment and the partnerships that we've talked about. That's not to diminish the importance of what the neighborhood wants to do. I think the question before the committee is that is an acre and an acre and a half enough to satisfy what the neighborhood is looking for, or if remedying environmental injustice and providing opportunities for urban agriculture are an important facet for the city council, then what are the other opportunities that are either in the area that we as a city can help bring forth that, as I said, are outside of what has been a zero-sum game over a piece of real estate. And so with that, certainly committee would be happy to answer any questions or any other comments.
Any questions from my colleagues? I have a question in terms of the training facility, and can you touch upon the role the trades have played in terms of designing this training facility?
Good afternoon, Chair Warsami and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm Robin Hutchison, I'm Director of Public Works. And Public Works has been developing this idea of recruitment and training associated with this facility and associated with all of our work in Public Works in the city. We have reached out to several labor organizations who have expressed their interest in continuing to work together on this project. They have expressed their needs to us, which we have then written into and expressed the need through the RCA that you have now. We also reached out to our partners at the Park Board, who have also written a letter of support, and continue to reach out to others who are feeling the same pinch in labor as we are. And as Mark showed, and as Lisa Cerny, our city engineer, expressed in Transportation and Public Works, nearly a third of our Public Works workforce will retire or are eligible to retire within the next 10 years. It is so important that we build our pipeline so that we can adapt to any problem that comes our way in the city, and so that we can continue to provide the same high quality and same high level of service that we provide to all of our 420,000 residents. And as we're doing this, we are committed to increasing diversity in our workforce. We're at about a quarter right now in Public Works. And by having a dedicated recruitment and training facility, we know we can do better, and we know that we can provide opportunity in this neighborhood and in every neighborhood.
Okay, and to follow up with this, as somebody who's very much interested in workforce development, what about the opportunities for young kids in the neighborhood? For example, Little Earth, a lot of young children live there. What about the large Latino community, large East African community around this facility? What would be the opportunities for these? Oh, thank you for that. What would be the opportunity for these young people to get into the trades, to get into city work? And can you describe these jobs in terms of, what do they come with?
Chair Warsami, members of the committee, that's a two-part question. I'll take it one at a time. We would love to work with our labor partners, with the community, with multiple communities, with our elected officials on providing as many opportunities for pipeline development. It's my personal opinion that we're not reaching kids quick enough to let them know what all of their opportunities are. And I think as we move forward in fleshing out a program for recruitment, it would be a priority to reach out to younger people, to begin the pipeline earlier. It may be too late for people who have already set their path, but if we can show and demonstrate and bring people in and have that kind of hands-on training that is proposed here, we feel that we can start our pipeline in middle school or even earlier. Second part of your question, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, was about,
Describe these type of jobs.
Thank you. Public Works has a series of jobs. We have jobs in Public Works that range from trainee programs where we offer a starting salary of $16 an hour that quickly bumps up to $17 an hour within 6 months. Those jobs are available with very, very low barrier to entry. You need no experience to apply for a trainee job in Public Works. We then would move someone into a service worker position, service worker 1, service worker 2, into a technician. We also have jobs for engineer trainees, technicians, engineers, and really all levels. The part of the pipeline that we're really trying to build is in the trainee program, where we think we can offer the most opportunity for residents of Minneapolis to get into a field that they perhaps previously didn't consider. We provide training, support. These jobs come with full benefits.
Okay, thank you. And we'll have a question from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Rasami and Director Hutchinson. And that was part of my inquiry, is what average salaries and education levels. I do think that these opportunities are ones that offer living wages beyond minimum wages without the crushing burden of student loans and such. But I was hoping you could speak to more of the environmental aspect of this facility. I know Director Ruff sort of touched on it a little bit, but the sort of greening aspects and how can that maybe be incorporated into the training and education in the community as well?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Jenkins, I'm going to treat this also as a two-part question, and I will answer the question from the perspective of Public Works, which is how Public Works jobs are very often green jobs, and then I will ask for assistance with some of the site design elements that are green elements from Finance and Property Services. Many of our jobs, first of all, Public Works is committed to combating climate change. It is real, it is happening, we get that. Our work is extremely focused on that, whether it be our work in transportation and changing mode shift, or as Director Ruff has said, our work to mitigate the effects of climate change, which often comes to us in the form of flooding. This site will help us combat the effects of climate change. Almost every neighborhood in the city experiences flooding. It's this team, the surface water and sewer team, that maintains storm tunnels and that needs to do more and more every single day to keep this city as livable as it is today. I consider that a green job. Second, this team located here would be responsible for distributing 55 million gallons a day of safe drinking water to every single resident in this city, as well as wholesale customers outside of our city. I consider that also to be an opportunity for a green job. There are numerous site design elements, including solar ready, stormwater recapture management. The greening of the fleet is a priority for Public Works. By consolidating, we have an opportunity to have more of our electric vehicles located here and to provide charging at this location. It's not just the vehicle. We have to build the charging. We need a place to build the charging if we want to then have the vehicles, and that's a big strategy for us as well. Am I missing anything from the site design in green? Mr. Ruff.
Thank
you. That's all.
No, Councilmember Cunningham had a question or comment. Twice you did, and I didn't. So I'm going to give you the opportunity.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to first say, in terms of like the jobs aspect, like a city job is legit in terms of salary, in terms of benefits. One of the biggest concerns that folks have are around traffic and the increased pollution specifically from the traffic with diesel trucks or such as that. Can you talked a little bit about electrifying the fleet? How are some other ways that there has been intentional conversations around mitigating the pollution that is created from the additional trucks and diesel and whatnot?
Chair Warsami, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for the question about mitigating the effects of the increase in traffic that we may see on certain roads. This is a problem for us all over the city as development is occurring, and we apply the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation rates to any project. We almost always see an increase in the number of trips. We're working really hard to reduce vehicle trips as much as we possibly can, and to, as quickly as we can, reduce the number of diesel pieces of equipment in our fleet. We will continue to do that. With regards to electrification, we wish the industry would catch up to where we want to be. Right now, it's possible for us to replace sedans and light-duty pickups with electric versions once we get our charging in place. But nobody's making a vac truck in electric form or a front-end loader, and these are important pieces of equipment that we still need to use that are not yet available in electric format.
They are available through Germany and Europe.
All right, thank you.
Canada makes this. I'm sorry, I excuse myself.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Director of Public Works. Any other questions from my colleagues?
I do.
Yep, Councilmember Cano, who's not a member of the committee, but who's here with us today. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I wanted to thank our city staff for working so diligently with the community over the last, at least minimum last year. I know that myself and residents in the Phillips community and in the surrounding area, as well as the entire city, have been engaging on this topic since it was first presented to me by then Councilmember John Quincy and Councilmember Kevin Reich. And so since then, we've been engaging, this was back in 2015, 2014, on this project and trying to figure out how to make this a project that meets the needs of multiple stakeholders. And so I appreciate the moment in time we're in now, and don't appreciate the loss of sleep I've gotten over the last couple of days trying to get ready for today's conversation and a final vote on this on December 7th. And so over the last, I think probably a week or so, we've been trying to truly explore the request and the demonstrated willingness by some council members to find a new site for this public works facility, to try to honor the community vision that was presented long ago. And we really did our best to try to get there. It's my sense we likely don't have the support to do that at this time, and I know that time is upon us, and so I'm trying to really balance these two moving pieces. And I wanted to say that, for me, over the last, I would say, 48 hours, it's been a sincere approach at trying to figure out what is that sweet spot that's going to be able to get enough support on the council to move this project forward, as well as continue to retain and value and uphold the main, the core of what the community vision has been over time, which some of it aligns really well around the economic development and workforce development questions and issues. It was really great to see that slide on the solar panel because the East Phillips Neighborhood Institute, which is an organization that was established out of a coalition of groups who has been steadily advancing this vision for sustainable community development in South Minneapolis, did help the city secure that a $10,000 grant from the Department of Energy to develop a low-income household solar garden. And so it's good to know that that's still a part of the mix and that we're going to be able to continue that discussion moving forward. I do have a couple of questions, but did want to just let my colleagues know that over the last, I would say, 24 hours, we've moved from can we find a new site for the water yard facility to can we find 1.5 acres to now engaging with the mayor and engaging with the various chairs of our committees to see where we can get this project to land by Friday. So it's my request that the committee forward without recommendation today to allow me more time to get folks in alignment on what we're hoping to do with this conversation, understanding that, I've communicated with a majority of you multiple times over the last 2 days, and we've had really in-depth conversations about how to make this a win-win for everyone. And so we're trying to figure out the how. It's not so much that, as our CFO mentioned, that it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, but it's more of how do we hold these conversations together, and how do we get to that place that feels fulfilling for everyone. And so I wanted to just state my intentions in that, is that's what I would like to see if the committee can entertain, is advancing this conversation to the full city council on Friday without a recommendation. And I did have a couple of questions, clarifications for the project details. So I noticed in the staff, in the agenda published for today, that there was language around demolishing portions of the current building or the entire building, and it doesn't really have a cost estimate. And so I kind of took to my own devices to come up with an estimate, but I would be curious to know from staff if we have sort of a ballpark figure of how much it would cost to demolish the building, and if we're thinking that the entire thing needs to be demolished, or if there could be a certain portion of it that could still stand. Because I would like to just get a better understanding of some of the anticipated costs of either of just demolition or remediation, because I did notice that the word remediation was also there, so it'd be great to hear what remediation we're hoping to do.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Cano. Mark? Yep.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, the estimates for demolition of the building are in the $1 million, $1.5 million range. Then on top of that would be remediation of both asbestos within the building and then also soil contamination that exists on the site. That is in the $2 to $2.5 million range. The authorization that we inserted into the request for council action is to authorize staff to solicit proposals. The results of that solicitation, that bid, essentially would come back to the Ways and Means Committee. And so that information at that time would be available. But that's the range in the budget that we have laid out.
Thank you, Mark. We have 2 questions from committee members. I'll start with Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Rosami. I would like to move the recommendation made by Councilmember Cano.
Okay. Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you. I was going to make that motion myself, so I'll second that, but it's moving it forward, just to clarify, moving it forward with no recommendation, without recommendation to council.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Fletcher? We have a motion.
Thank you, Chair Rosami. I'm willing to support that as well. Councilmember Cano has been working incredibly hard to try to find a win-win scenario to the best extent that we can. And I want to be clear that I don't think we're going to get to a point by Friday where anybody feels like this was a complete win for everybody. I think it is such an unfortunate situation that the way this has developed, and this happened before this council term, and we're working to figure out where we're at now, has pitted 2 things against each other that are both so valuable, right? There is, on the one hand, a community vision for this site that I think a lot of people have found very inspiring, and on the other hand, when we talk about environmental racism in this country, one of the first things that we talk about is Flint, Michigan, and the failure to provide clean water to citizens. And one of the things that I am proud of about this city is that we are thinking forward to make sure that we do not do that there is clean, safe drinking water in every single neighborhood in every single part of the city, and that is a part of doing the work to not enact environmental racism. And our workers who lift this up, our workers who do this work deserve to be lifted up, deserve to be respected, deserve to work in a safe and healthy environment themselves. And so I want to be very, very clear that we have found ourselves in a position where we are weighing multiple very positive values against each other, and we are going to try to figure out how to squeeze as much of that into one proposal as we can. It is not going to be what everybody hoped and dreamed of necessarily, but we are going to get to something good. One of the things that I'm very encouraged by and that I hope everybody starts to think about is that as we are thinking about the important work of clean water, that this training facility really has a lot of potential. And I think that as we think about how we develop this and which proposal we end up focusing in on, and what kinds of staff direction we give for the direction moving forward, that we make sure we get absolutely as much as we can out of that training facility, that we make sure we get absolutely as much opportunity as we can squeeze out of the opportunity to create a community-based center to invite people who have been excluded from a lot of the building trades historically to get into these jobs and be part of providing clean water to our community. And so I am optimistic, based on the last 48 hours, that the work Councilmember Cano is doing is going to provide some genuine benefit to her ward, some genuine benefit to our whole city, and looking forward to being part of those conversations. And if that seems to be where the committee is going, I'm willing to support that so that we can give us a couple more days.
Okay. I would add my support to this motion as well. The Council Vice President has made and Councilmember Johnson has made as well. And the reason is, the main thing is, we have to, as policymakers, have discussions. We have to come to an agreement. We have to come to a consensus. My main thing is about the jobs. That area of East Phillips, South Minneapolis is one of the most depressed areas when it comes to jobs, especially for Native Americans, especially for people of color. And we have an opportunity to bring in the Native American community and the communities of color that live in South Minneapolis into good paying jobs with the city, with the county, and with regional districts. Because, public works departments exist in every single jurisdiction in the state of Minnesota. So having our young children from walking distance, from Little Earth, walking distance, get a good job, good training, I think it's a lifetime opportunity that we need to seize upon. So that's my main support for this, for the motion. In terms of, and also I would like to mention before we go forward, is the strain and the pressure that has been put on city staff, especially the directors that are here today, who have been put under a lot of pressure to come up with quick solutions, to come up with numbers, to come up with data. As we had this debate taking place with regards to the roof depot, and I'd like to recognize them. So, Councilmember Johnson would like to have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to speak on this item for a moment, and I want to recognize everybody that came out here today and has been through this process, as we've had a number of meetings on this, and I want you to know your voices matter in this. And I think personally that you have brought forward a really incredible, innovative vision around utilizing this site, and I really want and wish we could find a way to get there. And I have worked closely with Councilmember Cano on trying to find the political will to make that happen. This is just such an ideal site along the Greenway and by the light rail station. I think that's also a reason why Public Works looks at this site and sees it as an opportunity as well. But I really want a solution where we're empowering the community, or lifting up, rather, an empowered community and that vision, and circling around and supporting it. And I wish we could find a way to get to that, and that's my first preference on that. And if we can't, then I think we circle up and try to find a way to get to maximizing the opportunity at this site and what we can get the support on the council for. But I still have conflicted emotions on this, because if we've been in dozens of hours of meetings with the community around this, discussing this site, why does the community not support it for all of these great green jobs that we've talked about? And I trust the intelligence of the community to make that informed decision on the site. And I think we need to recognize the lengthy history that government has played in being paternalistic and making decisions for communities. And so I really wish we had that support built already in this moment. And I also want to recognize too, when we've had discussions around the potential of moving it to other sites, the issue that often comes up is around money. And I see that when the NFL comes to us, the city council says, yes, we can afford giving you millions of dollars. When the NBA comes to us, the council says, yes, we can afford giving you millions of dollars. When the NCAA just came to us, the council said, yes, we can afford to give you almost $1 million. When folks come to us asking for millions of dollars for giving fundraising on the downtown park, we said, yes, we can afford that as well. And suddenly when one of our most diverse communities in the city comes to us and says, we'd like that support, we say, no, I'm sorry, is that really financially responsible? I don't know that we have money for this. And so, thank you. It's just really frustrating as a policymaker. I think we need to recognize that we have communities within our city that have been disinvested in, and in order to make up for that, we really have to go the extra mile, and we have to step up and put additional resources in those communities. That's work I support, and I hope as a council we can get to that as a body and actually step up and do that work. I thought that would be with this project. Hopefully there's still opportunities on this site where we can make that additional investment and then find other opportunities within the city as well. And as I say all this, I want to recognize too, I know others have the hard work our public works staff have done on this. In no way do I look at this project as a negative thing to have this public works facility. We need this facility built somewhere. I know our staff have put in a ton of time and they are following council direction on this as well. I really commend them for all their work throughout this because it has not been difficult, and I'm sure they can't wait till there's some finality from the council on this. And I really wanted to give them a shout out for that, and the folks in property services as well. They're doing just tireless work every day on behalf of the residents of our city. Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak again, and I hope you won't use my previous comments about the other agenda item against me for this one. But I really appreciate the committee is moving it forward without recommendation. I guess there would have been other options that I might have thought were great too, but I was very concerned when all I saw on the agenda was option A. And I actually think we're pretty close to a win-win. I've had some conversations. Like a lot of you, I do open office hours in the ward, and I've been visited from a lot of folks from Phillips who've talked about the needs and the wants and the desires. And when I look at the options presented, I look at option D, and I think, well, option D is really close to what they're wanting and what they're expecting and trying to get to. And also, it provides much of the needs to serve the city's interests on there as well. And I think with a few more days, we can work out some of the details and hear one another's concerns. I'm hopeful that we can come back on Friday with something that can work for at least a majority. I know sometimes we want to make sure everything is consensus and we have 13 votes for everything, but remember, we can pass something if there's a little less than that as well, and people have a right to stand on the outside. But I think we're close to a win-win, and I don't want to act like that it's hopeless. I think some people will look at the benefits that they can get from option D and some land that's reserved for community needs and interests and other uses along the greenway there. And they can see that as a positive. And we've already, I certainly understand that our staff are ready to make whatever we do work. I mean, they're in this, I don't know, this stew because of the city council has put them there based on recommendations that came back, and we're having trouble figuring it out. And I know that they can rise to the occasion and they'll make whatever they need to work. And I'm deeply grateful for all the effort they put into this so far and for what they're going to do in the future.
Thank you, Cam. Councilmember Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the indulgence. First of all, I would encourage anyone who hadn't seen the operational outlay that was given by Director Cerny in Transportation Public Works Committee to get the full details of the operational aspect. Certain key highlights were alluded to today, but as we wanted to sort of split the conversation from finance and property and sort of public works operations, there's more detail in that report, and I believe that's something that could be reviewed for anyone, be it a colleague or someone in the audience. Also, the work that went behind getting to that place, I think, was multi-jurisdictional in nature, and I think it's been alluded to the immense work that's come into that which is presented to us today. I will also say, and I was going to reserve this for perhaps full council, but I'll say it now. There is this notion of, okay, there's department needs. There's sort of the city, the enterprise needs. But behind that, there's a human equation too. We're talking about hundreds of not just abstract employees, people. The actual frontline workers, the foreman people, the managers, the people who actually deliver stuff are people, many of whom live in our communities as well. And as we try to say we're going to have a workforce of the future, those are people too. So these are about people's needs and how we best coordinate our resources to meet those needs. And I'm an optimist. I don't think we're going to be forwarding something and then completely reversing it with a different option. That's not what forwarding without recommendation means. What I do think is that we can be optimists. We have many, many ways to find a win-win here that goes beyond a constrained sort of framework. We should have an expanded framework. If it's important to do for this community, let's put all our resources on the table, all the options on the table, and have direction to accommodate that from basically our experts in economic development, CPED. The appropriate people could really deliver on this, and then we, as a supportive council, can push that along as a priority. And I'm very, very optimistic we can find that place and set that direction and set that course. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having this. Councilmember Cano's work has been pretty extraordinary, and the committee's outlay and discussion has been pretty impressive as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher?
Just to echo what Councilmember Rex said, I think it's important for us to think expansively about where the opportunities are for a win, and for everybody to sort of get what they need. And I think if you think about option D, it's the one that has the most land, so it'd be tempting to think about that as a win. But on the other hand, it raises construction costs by so much, and we would have to reimburse the water fund, and so we would end up paying 3 to 4 times what that land is worth in order to do that, as opposed to buying maybe more land somewhere else. So I would almost think about, let's, over the next 3 days, keep a pretty open mind about which direction we're going to go with this, because the truth is that an urban farming operation is a very, very challenging thing to set up and to make the math work under the best circumstances. And if we overpay, and if we buy you too little land for way too much money to start with, that doesn't get you to where you need to be. And so let's really think about what the right solution is. And we've got a few days to try to figure something out, but I want everybody to try to keep as open a mind as you can, because this is a challenging conversation, and it is one that we've got to wrap up so that we can make everything happen that needs to happen for our city.
Okay, is there... Thank you. Okay, thank you. We have... All right, thank you. So, any further discussion on Council Vice President's motion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against? That motion passes. And I would like to thank everybody that came. We have further discussions on this item, and hopefully we'll come to a resolution on Friday. And having concluded our business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.